I was 23 the first time I died. I remember the warmth of the bathwater, the bitter taste of the pesticide on my tongue, and the way the blood from my wrists bloomed through the water like ribbons of red silk. I remember the cold creeping up my arms, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on my chest, and the distant sound of a door being kicked open. Too late, always too late. And then I woke up. I was 21 again, standing in my stepmother's garden in a dress that didn't fit, holding a glass of red wine that I'd watched my stepsister poison with her own manicure hands. The same glass. The same night, the same party where I was supposed to hand that glass to the man who would one day marry me out of obligation and hate me for the rest of his life. But this time, I knew what was in that glass. And this time, I had a choice. I'd been standing in the corner of the garden for the last 10 minutes, trying to piece together what was happening to me. One moment I was dead, floating in that bloody bathwater, and the next I was here, young again, then again, dressed in clothes that didn't fit because my stepmother refused to spend money on me. The same ache in my shoulders from carrying my 6-year-old brother to bed, the same hunger gnawing at my stomach because I'd given him my dinner portion. And Vivian, my stepsister, was circling the garden like a shark, her eyes fixed on me and on the glass in my hand. "You should be getting ready," she said, appearing at my elbow with a smile that never reached her eyes. "He's going to be here soon. You know what you have to do." I looked at her, really looked at her. In my previous life, I'd been too terrified to see her clearly. I'd seen her as the favorite, the protected one, the daughter my stepmother loved and my father indulged. I'd seen her threats and her cruelty, and I'd been too beaten down to resist. Now, with the memory of my death still fresh in my mind, I saw something else. I saw a girl who'd never had to fight for anything, who'd never been hungry or cold or afraid, who'd weaponized her privilege like a blade. "I know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm going to find him." Her smile widened. "Good girl, don't disappoint me, or your little brother might have a very bad night." She walked away, and I watched her go, my grip tightening on the glass. In my previous life, I'd been so afraid for my brother that I'd done exactly what she wanted. I'd found the man she'd planned to seduce, and I drugged him, and I traded my body for my family's safety. I'd spent 5 years apologizing for it. 5 years being the villain in a story I never wanted to be part of. 5 years watching a man I loved hate me for something I'd done to save my brother. And then I'd killed myself to give him his freedom. Not this time. I moved through the garden, avoiding the clusters of guests in their expensive clothes and easy laughter. The party was being held at the Hamilton estate, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass that made my stepmother's home look like a shack. In my previous life, I'd been too intimidated to look at anything. This time, I noticed everything. The art on the walls, the marble floors, the servants gliding through the crowds with trays of champagne. And I noticed the people who were looking at me. Vivian had been right about one thing. Charles Sterling was here. I spotted him across the garden, standing in a circle of men who clearly wanted his approval. He was taller than I remembered, his dark hair swept back from a face that was too beautiful to be real. In my previous life, I'd seen him as a savior, a hero, the man who'd pulled me from the darkness. In this life, I saw something else. I saw the man who'd spent 5 years refusing to look at me, the man who'd made me feel like I was a disease he'd been forced to endure. The man who told his best friend that I was insignificant and manipulative while I was standing outside the door with coffee in my hands, trying desperately to earn a kind word. I saw the man who'd never loved me and who'd never pretended otherwise. And standing next to him, her hand on his arm like a claim, was Lily. Lily was everything I wasn't. Rich, beautiful, confident. She'd grown up in the same circles as Charles, attended the same schools, vacationed in the same places. In my previous life, I'd hated her with a burning intensity that had consumed me for years. I'd hated the way she laughed, the way she touched him, the way he looked at her like she was the sun, and he'd been waiting his whole life to feel warm. In this life, I didn't hate her. I couldn't afford to. Because Lily was the one he was supposed to marry, and I was the one who'd ruined it. Vivian's plan had been simple. I was supposed to hand Charles a glass, and once the drug took effect, she'd be waiting in the room to take my place. She'd wanted to be his wife, his partner, the woman who'd inherited this sterling fortune. She'd never expected me to take her place. In my previous life, I'd done it out of desperation. I'd known that Charles was a good man, that he'd never leave me to the wolves, and I'd been right. He'd married me. He'd given me a home, security, a life I'd never dreamed of. And he'd never looked at me the way he looked at Lily. Now, I watched them from across the garden. The way she leaned into him, the way he let her, the easy intimacy of two people who'd known each other their entire lives. And I felt something I'd never expected. Peace. They were perfect for each other. They'd always been perfect for each other. And I'd spent 5 years trying to stand between them because I'd been too selfish to let go. I turned away and walked back toward the house. "Miss Clark." The voice came from behind me, deep and familiar, and for a moment I couldn't breathe that I knew that voice. I'd heard it in the middle of the night, whispering things I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd heard it when he was making love to me and pretending I was someone else. I turned around and there he was. Charles Sterling, standing 3 feet away from me, his dark eyes fixed on my face with an intensity I'd never seen before. He was even more beautiful up close, and the sight of him made my chest ache with old wounds. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Can I help you?" His expression flickered, just for a second. "You dropped this." He held out a small silver bracelet, the one my mother had given me before she died. I hadn't even noticed it was gone. The clasp had been loose for years, but I'd never had the money to fix it. "Thank you," I said, reaching for it. He didn't let go. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt a jolt of something electric, something that made me pull back like I'd been burned. You're Anna Clark, he said. From the Clark family. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, sir. Your stepmother's family has been trying to get an invitation to this party for years. His voice was cool, almost clinical. And yet here you are, holding a glass that looks like it's been sitting out for an hour. I looked down at the wine in my hand. He was right. The liquid had gone flat, the bubbles long gone. In my previous life, I'd been so focused on the task that I'd handed it to him without thinking. I'm not going to drink it, I said, and I'm not going to give it to you. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Then what are you going to do with it? I thought about Vivian, waiting in the wing of the house with a silk robe and a plan. I thought about my brother, sleeping in his tiny room, dreaming of a future I died to protect. I thought about Charles, standing in front of me, the man who'd hated me for 5 years. And I made my choice. I turned and walked to the nearest potted plant, a massive fern that was probably worth more than my entire wardrobe. I poured the wine into the soil, watching it soak into the dirt, and I dropped the glass into the bushes. There, I said, turning back to him. Now no one's poisoned and no one's drugged, and you can go back to your party. His eyes widened. For a moment, he looked like I'd slapped him. You knew it was drugged? I knew. I crossed my arms. I'm not going to apologize for it, because I didn't put it in there. But I'm also not going to let anyone else use me to get to you. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he smiled. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. You're not what I expected, he said. Good, I said. Neither are you. I walked away before he could say anything else. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating, and every instinct was screaming at me to run back and explain, to apologize, to beg him not to hate me. But I didn't. I'd spent 5 years of my previous life trying to earn his approval, and it had never been enough. I'd exhausted myself, destroyed myself, and in the end, all I'd gotten was a funeral and a second chance. This time, I wasn't going to trade my self-respect for anything. I found the terrace where the drinks were being served and grabbed a glass of white wine, pure, unpoisoned, boring. I sipped it slowly, letting the cold liquid steady my nerves, and tried to figure out my next move. I'd broken the cycle. I hadn't drugged Charles. I hadn't fallen into Vivian's trap. But I'd also made an enemy, and Vivian was the kind of woman who'd never forgive that. You've got guts, came a voice from behind me. I'll give you that. I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of money. She was holding a glass of champagne, and she was looking at me like I was the most interesting thing she'd seen all night. Sorry, I said. The girl who just poured a glass of drugged wine into a fern and then told Charles Sterling to his face that he wasn't what she expected. She grinned. That takes nerve. I'm Elizabeth. She extended her hand, and I shook it, still confused. Do I know you? I asked. You don't, she said, but I know Charles. I've known him my whole life, and I've never seen anyone talk to him like that. He looked confused. I don't think he's ever been confused before. I didn't mean to confuse him. I just meant. I know what you meant. She cut me off, her smile softening. You're the girl everyone's been talking about. The one Vivian's been trying to set up. I froze. Everyone's been talking about me? Darling, it's a small world, and Vivian's not very subtle. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Word is, she's been bragging about how she's going to get an invitation to the Sterling family's inner circle, and everyone's been waiting to see how you'd handle it. How I'd handle it. You're the pawn, sweetheart. Everyone's been watching to see if you'd play the game. She took a sip of her champagne, and you just told Charles to go back to his party and didn't even apologize. I stared at her, my mind reeling. I thought I was invisible. I thought no one cared about the girl in the corner with a flat wine and the too small dress. But Elizabeth was telling me I'd been the center of attention this whole time. What happens now? I asked. Elizabeth shrugged. Now you wait. Charles is going to want to find you again. He's the kind of man who doesn't like loose threads. She paused, her eyes glinting. And Vivian's going to realize you've ruined her plan. She was right. I was halfway through my second glass of wine, trying to figure out how to get back to my stepmother's house without Vivian's car, when a sharp voice cut through the music. Anna. I turned to find Vivian storming toward me, her face mottled with rage. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my rent for a year, and she'd clearly been looking for me for a while. Where is it? She demanded. Where's the drink? I poured it out. Her eyes widened. You what? I poured it out, Vivian. I'm not going to drug Charles Sterling for you. I'm not going to do anything you tell me to do, ever again. She stared at me, her face going through a series of expressions, shock, fury, and finally, something cold and calculating. You think you can talk to me like that? You think you can just... I know what I can do. Vivian, I can walk away. I can leave this party. Leave your mother's house. Leave your family. I stepped closer, letting my voice drop. I can take my brother with me, and I can tell everyone about the things you've done, about the drugs, about the men, about the way you've treated me. You wouldn't. Try me. She was trembling, I realized, not from cold, from rage. You've ruined everything, she hissed. Everything I've planned. Everything I've worked for. You worked for a man who wasn't yours to take, and I'm not going to let you drag me down anymore. Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another voice interrupted. Anna? I turned to find my stepmother walking toward us, her smile fixed in place, her eyes full of questions. She was the kind of woman who'd built her life on charm and manipulation, and she taught Vivian everything she knew. Anna, darling, she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. Vivian's been looking for you. Is something wrong? Vivian started, but I cut her off. Everything's fine, Mother. I just told Vivian I didn't want to play her little game tonight. I smiled, a smile I'd learned from the best. I'm tired, and I'd like to go home. My stepmother's smile faltered. She looked between me and her daughter, clearly trying to figure out what had happened. Of course, she said, her voice clipped, but the car service doesn't arrive until... I'll take her. We all turned to see Charles Sterling standing at the edge of the terrace, his hands in his pockets, his expression as cool and unreadable as ever. I'll take Anna home, he repeated. It's the least I can do after she dropped her bracelet. There was a beat of silence. Vivian's face went white. My stepmother's smile turned rigid. That's very generous of you, Charles, my stepmother said, but we couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition. I was leaving anyway. He walked toward me, his eyes fixed on mine. Anna? I looked at Vivian. I looked at my stepmother. I looked at the beautiful, dangerous man who'd spent 5 years of a previous life hating me. And I made my choice. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said. I appreciate it. The car was a sleek black Mercedes, and the silence inside it was deafening. Charles drove with his eyes fixed on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't ask me where I lived. He already knew, which meant he'd asked someone, which meant he'd been thinking about me. Why did you do it? He asked, breaking the silence. Do what? Pour out the drink. Tell me you wouldn't drug me. He glanced at me, his profile sharp in the passing streetlights. You could have gone through with it. Vivian would have given you what you wanted. You'd be free. I laughed. IT came out bitter, cracked. Free? There's no such thing as free for someone like me. If I'd gone through with it, I'd have traded one cage for another. I leaned back in the seat. At least this way, I don't have to lie to myself. He was quiet for a long moment, then softly. Who hurt you? I closed my eyes. Everyone, I said. Everyone hurt me. When I opened my eyes again, he was looking at me, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Thank you, he said, for telling me the truth. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He pulled up in front of my stepmother's house, and I reached for the door handle. Anna, he said, and I froze. Mr. Sterling? Be careful, he said. Vivian's not the one you need to worry about. I turned to look at him, but his face was already turned back to the road. When I got out of the car and walked toward my stepmother's house, I didn't look back. But I felt his eyes on me, and I felt something I'd never felt in 5 years of marriage. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bathtub again. The red water, the cold creeping at my arms, the sound of my own voice, small and broken, calling for a mother who'd been dead for years. And then the door bursting open. Too late, always too late. I lay in my childhood bed, the same thin mattress, the same faded sheets, and I tried to remember what it felt like to be free. I'd never really known. Not in my first life, not in my second. I'd been a prisoner from the moment my mother died, and the only time I'd ever felt like I could breathe was when I was floating in that bathtub, watching the blood drain out of me. You're alive, I told myself. You're alive, and you have a second chance. Don't waste it. But the fear was still there, coiled in my chest like a snake. Fear of Vivian. Fear of my stepmother. Fear of the man who'd driven me home and told me to be careful, as if he'd known exactly what I was running from. I didn't sleep. I lay awake until the first gray light crept through the curtains, and then I got up and went to check on my brother. Ethan was still asleep, his small face peaceful in the dim morning light. He was 6 years old, and he looked exactly like our mother. The same dark hair, the same gentle curve of the mouth, the same way of sleeping with one hand curled under his cheek. He was the only reason I'd survived as long as I had, the only reason I'd done the things I'd done. I knelt beside his bed and brushed the hair from his forehead. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Anna? His voice was sleepy, confused. Is it time to wake up? Not yet, I said softly. Go back to sleep. I'll make you breakfast. He smiled, that pure, trusting smile that made my chest ache, and closed his eyes again. I stayed there for a long moment, watching him breathe, and I made a promise to myself. I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again. Not Vivian. Not my stepmother. Not anyone. The kitchen was quiet when I crept downstairs. I'd learned to move silently years ago, a survival skill, like knowing when to duck and when to stay still. I made breakfast for Ethan and myself, eating quickly before anyone else woke up, and I was washing the dishes when I heard the front door slam. Anna. Vivian's voice. I took a breath, dried my hands, and walked into the foyer. She was standing there, her face flushed with rage, her hair still tangled from sleep. Behind her, my stepmother stood with her arms crossed, her expression cold and calculating. You ruined everything, Vivian hissed. Everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? I ruined your plan to drug a man and trap him into marriage, I said calmly. I think that's the opposite of ruining something. I think that's called saving someone from a mistake. Vivian's face went red. She lunged at me, her hand raised to slap, but I caught her wrist. I held it there, my grip tight, and I looked her in the eye. Don't, I said. Don't ever raise your hand to me again. She tried to pull back, but I didn't let go that I was stronger than I'd been in my previous life. Not because I trained, but because I'd stopped being afraid. And fear was the only thing that had ever made me weak. Let go of me, she hissed. Not until you hear what I have to say. I leaned in closer. I'm done being your pawn, and I'm done being your punching bag, and I'm done doing your dirty work because you threatened my brother. If you ever come near Ethan again, if you ever so much as look at him wrong, I will go to the police, and I will go to the press, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Vivian's face went pale. Behind her, my stepmother shifted, her expression sour. You wouldn't, she said. No one would believe you. I let go of Vivian's wrist and stepped back. You'd be surprised what people believe when there's evidence. I walked past them both and went to wake Ethan. I had a plan, and it started with getting us out of that house. But first, there was the matter of Charles Sterling. I wasn't expecting to see him again so soon. I certainly wasn't expecting to see him in my stepmother's foyer, standing next to my father, looking like he owned the place. I'd just come back from taking Ethan to school, a small mercy I'd negotiated with my stepmother, the only thing she'd ever given me willingly, when I walked into the house and found them there. My father was smiling, a rare expression that made him look almost human. Charles was standing with his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on me the moment I walked through the door. "Anna," my father said, "I didn't know you were friends with Mr. Sterling." "We're not," I started. "We met last night," Charles cut in smoothly, and I realized I hadn't properly thanked her for her hospitality. Hospitality. I almost laughed. I'd poured wine into a fern and told him to go back to his party. That was about as far from hospitality as you could get. "I'm sure Anna was happy to help," my stepmother said, her voice bright and brittle. "She's such a gracious girl." I looked at her, then at Charles. Something was happening here. Something I didn't understand. The moment my father and stepmother left the room, called away by some manufactured emergency, Charles turned to me. "You need to see this." He opened his hand, and in his palm was a silver bracelet. My mother's bracelet, the one I dropped at the party. I'd assumed I'd lost it forever. "I told you I found it," he said, "but I didn't tell you the whole truth." "What do you mean?" "Your stepmother had it." His voice was flat, matter of fact. She was holding it in her hand when I came to return it. She said she found it in the garden and was planning to sell it. I felt my blood run cold. That bracelet was the only thing I had left of my mother, the only tangible proof that she'd ever existed. "Why would she?" I started. "Because she knew what it meant to you, and she wanted to take it from you." He pressed the bracelet into my hand. I told her it was mine, and I told her I'd lost it, and I needed it back. She didn't argue. I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I don't like people who use leverage to hurt others." There was something in his voice, something I'd never heard before. A weight, a depth. It made me think of the man who'd held me in his arms on nights I wasn't supposed to remember. "I don't understand," I said. "Why are you doing this?" He stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he was going to touch me, but he stopped, his eyes searching mine. "Anna," he said softly, "do you believe in second chances?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I took the bracelet and went up to my room, my mind spinning. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Charles Sterling had never looked at me like that in my previous life. He'd never saved my mother's bracelet. He'd never asked me about second chances. Unless he remembered. The thought hit me like a physical blow. I sat down on my bed, the bracelet clutched in my hand, and I tried to remember everything I knew about the night I died, the way the door had burst open, the arms that had lifted me out of the water, the voice that had screamed my name. I'd always assumed it was a hallucination, a dying wish, but what if it wasn't? What if Charles had found me? What if he'd been the one to break down that door? And what if he remembered it too? I didn't have time to think about it. That afternoon, Vivian cornered me in the hallway. "You think you're so clever," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just waltz in and take everything from me, but you're wrong." "I'm not trying to take anything from you," I said. "I'm trying to leave." "Leave?" She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You can't leave. You've got nothing, and oh money, and oh connections, and oh one who cares about you." She stepped closer, her eyes glinting. "And even if you did, your brother's still here, your little Ethan, and you wouldn't want anything bad to happen to him, would you?" I felt the anger rise up in me, hot and fierce, but I held it back. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. "What do you want, Vivian?" "Charles Sterling," she said. "I want him, and you're going to help me get him." I stared at her. "I'm not going to. You're going to arrange a meeting, a private one, and you're going to make sure I get what I want." She smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Or Ethan might have a very bad accident. A fall down the stairs, a sudden illness, I haven't decided yet." I felt my hands clench into fists. "You're insane." "Maybe," she shrugged, "but I'm also the one in control, and you're the one who's going to do exactly what I say, or your brother pays the price." She walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I'd been so careful. I'd thought I'd broken free, but Vivian was right. I was still trapped, still powerless, still forced to play her game. But this time, I had something I didn't have before. I had Charles. I found him that evening, walking through the garden behind my stepmother's house. He was standing near the same fountain where I'd poured out the wine, his hands in his pockets, his face turned up to the sky. "Mr. Sterling," I said. He turned to look at me, and for a moment, he looked almost relieved. "Anna," he said, "I was hoping you'd come. I need to ask you something." I walked toward him, my heart pounding. "When you found me in the bathroom, when you broke down the door, were you really there?" His expression flickered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me." My voice was shaking. "I know you were there. I heard you screaming my name. I felt you lift me out of the water, and I know you remember it." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, and then, slowly, he nodded. "I remember," he said. "I remember everything." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. He remembered. He actually remembered. "Why?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to scare you." He stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Anna, I've been trying to find a way to talk to you since I woke up. I've been trying to understand why you did it. Why you killed yourself. Why you didn't let me help you." "Help me?" I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You hated me. You told your best friend I was insignificant and manipulative. You never looked at me like I was anything but a burden. His face went pale. I said that. You said it. I stared at him, and I heard it. I heard everything. He reached for me, his hand on my arm. Anna, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was trying to push you away because I couldn't admit what I was feeling. I couldn't admit that I needed you. I pulled back. You needed me? I needed you, he said, and I spent years pretending I didn't. And then you died, and I realized I'd wasted every single moment. I looked at him, this man who'd hated me in my previous life, who'd made me feel like I was nothing, who'd driven me to a bathtub with a razor blade, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Charles, I said softly, I can't do this. I can't go through it all again. You don't have to. He stepped closer, his hands cupping my face. I'm not the same man I was, and you're not the same woman. We have a second chance, a real chance. Don't throw it away. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this time would be different, but I'd been burned before, and the scars were still fresh. I need to go, I said. I need to think. I walked away, leaving him standing in the garden, the moonlight casting long shadows across his face, and I felt something I'd never felt before. I woke the next morning to the sound of moving trucks. I pulled back the curtain and looked out the window. The house next door, a sprawling Victorian that had sat empty for years, was suddenly alive with activity. Men in work boots were carrying furniture through the front door. A moving van was parked in the driveway. And standing on the front porch, directing the chaos with calm authority, was Charles Sterling. I felt my heart stop. He'd moved. He'd actually moved into the house next door. Not next door to my stepmother's house, a few blocks away, a different street entirely. But still, he'd made a point of being close. I watched him for a long moment, trying to understand what this meant. And my previous life. He'd kept his distance from me even when we were married. We'd shared a house, but I'd rarely seen him. He'd been a ghost in my life, a presence I could feel but never touch, and now he was putting himself in my path, deliberately, conspicuously. Why? I didn't have time to figure it out. Ethan's school bus would arrive in an hour, and I needed to get him ready. I was in the kitchen, making Ethan's lunch, when Vivian appeared in the doorway. Did you see? She hissed. He moved next door. He moved next door to us. I kept my eyes on the sandwich I was making. I saw. You told me you weren't trying to take anything from me. Her voice was shaking with rage. And now he's living next door. You must have done something. You must have. I didn't do anything. I finished the sandwich and started packing it in Ethan's lunchbox. He moved here on his own. I have no idea why. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. You're lying. You've been lying to me this whole time. You think you can just take him from me, and I'll let you get away with it. I turned to face her, my voice calm and steady. Vivian, I've told you 100 times. I'm not interested in Charles Sterling. I don't want him. I don't want anything from him. You're a liar. I'm not lying. I looked her in the eye. If you want him, go get him. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to help you either. She stared at me, her eyes searching mine. And then, slowly, something shifted in her expression. Not trust, never trust, but a kind of grudging acceptance. Fine, she said. But if I find out you've been talking to him, I'll make you regret it. I'll make sure, Ethan. Don't. My voice was sharp, cutting through her words like a blade. Don't threaten my brother. Not again. She smiled, a cold, cruel smile. Then stay away from him. She walked away, and I stood there in the kitchen, my hand shaking, my heart pounding. I'd just made a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Ethan was already on the bus by the time I made it outside. I stood at the end of the driveway, watching the yellow vehicle disappear around the corner, and I tried to steady my breathing. You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned to find Charles standing at the edge of my driveway, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He was dressed casually, jeans and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked younger like this, more human. I'm fine, I said, just thinking. About what? About how you moved next door to me. I crossed my arms. That's not a coincidence, is it? He smiled, a small, rueful smile. No, it's not. Then why? He walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. Because I need to be close to you. I need to make sure you're okay. His voice dropped. And I need to tell you the truth. The whole truth. What truth? He looked around, then back at me. Not here, not now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. My new number. Call me when you're ready. And Anna, he paused, his eyes meeting mine. Be careful. Vivian isn't the only one who's been paying attention. He walked away, leaving me standing in the driveway with the paper clutched in my hand. I didn't call him that day. I couldn't. I had too much to process, too many questions that didn't have answers. Instead, I spent the day with Ethan, playing games and reading books and pretending everything was normal. But at night, when Ethan was asleep and the house was quiet, I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about what Charles had said. Vivian isn't the only one who's been paying attention. What did that mean? Who else was watching me, and why? I didn't sleep well. I never slept well anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bathtub, the blood, the cold. I saw Charles's face as he looked down at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the front door. I crept downstairs, my heart pounding. It was past midnight. No one should be knocking at this hour. I opened the door a crack and found Charles standing there, his face pale, his eyes wild. Anna, he said, I need to tell you something. Now, I whispered. It's the middle of the night. I know. He stepped closer. But I can't wait any longer. I need you to understand what happened. Why I did what I did. What are you talking about? Your mother. He looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't read. I know how she died, and I know who killed her. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. What? Your mother. He stepped into the house, his voice low and urgent. She was poisoned. Slowly, over time. Someone was giving her something that made her sick, and eventually it killed her. My hands were shaking. How do you know that? Because I found the records after you died, after I found you in that bathroom. I couldn't let it go that I needed to understand, and I needed to know why you'd done it, and I started digging. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a copy of the autopsy report. The official one says she died of natural causes. But I found the original, the one that was hidden. IT says she had high levels of a heavy metal in her system, chronic poisoning. I took the paper, my hands trembling so badly I could barely unfold it. Who did it? It's your stepmother's signature at the bottom of the original report. She was the one who signed the authorization to bury the original and replace it with the fake. I stared at the words on the page, my mind reeling. M.Y. stepmother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd fed me, who'd pretended to care about me. She'd killed my mother, slowly, systematically, for years. And then she'd covered it up. Why? I asked. Why would she do that? Because your mother had something she wanted. Your mother had an inheritance from her family, and your stepmother wanted it for herself. He stepped closer. When your mother died, the money was supposed to go to you and your brother, but your stepmother was the executor of the will, and she found a way to take it all. She made sure you never saw a dime. I sat down on the stairs. The paper clutched in my hands till I felt like I couldn't breathe, and my mother had been murdered, and my stepmother had killed her. And I'd spent my whole life living in that woman's house, eating her food, letting her control me. You need to go to the police, Charles said. You need to tell them everything. They won't believe me, I said. I have no proof, just a piece of paper that could be forged. I have more. He knelt in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. I have letters. I have witnesses. I have everything you need to put her away, but I need you to be brave. I need you to trust me. I looked at him, this man who'd hated me in my previous life, who'd made me feel like I was nothing, who'd driven me to the edge of death. And I saw something I'd never seen before. Desperation. You did all of this for me? I asked. Even after what I did to you? Even after I ruined your life? Anna. His voice was barely a whisper. You didn't ruin my life. You saved it. We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I looked up to see my stepmother standing at the top of the staircase, her face cold and composed, her eyes fixed on Charles with a predatory intensity. Mr. Sterling, she said. What a surprise. I didn't expect to find you here at this hour. Charles stood, his body moving in front of me like a shield. I was just leaving. I don't think so. She walked down the stairs, her movements slow and deliberate. I think we need to have a conversation. All three of us. I felt my blood run cold. She knew. She'd heard everything. Vivian was right about you, she said, her voice flat. You've been plotting against me. You've been trying to take everything I've built. You killed my mother, I said. You poisoned her and stole her inheritance. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Your mother was weak. She didn't deserve what she had. I made sure it went to someone who would appreciate it. She was your sister-in-law. She trusted you. And she was wrong to trust me. She stepped closer, her eyes glinting, just like you were wrong to trust him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. You see, Anna, I've been prepared for this. I've been prepared for the day you'd find out the truth. She held up the bottle. These are the same pills I gave your mother. A slow poison, harmless in small doses, but fatal over time. And now, I'm going to give them to you. Charles stepped in front of me. You're not touching her. Stop me. She smiled, a cold, cruel smile. You're a powerful man, Charles, but you're also a fool. You think you can protect her from me? I've been planning this for 20 years. She lunged at me, the bottle in her hand, but Charles was faster. He knocked the bottle out of her hand and grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. Call the police, he said. Now. I ran to the phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911. The operator answered, and I heard my own voice, high and panicked, telling them everything. When I looked back, my stepmother was on the ground, her face a mask of rage. Charles was standing over her, his expression cold and unreadable. You're going to prison, he said, for the rest of your life. She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. You think you've won? You think you've saved her? She's already broken. She's always been broken, and you can't fix that. I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me in hatred, who'd killed my mother, who'd spent my whole life making me feel worthless, and I felt something I'd never expected. Pity. I'm not broken, I said. I'm stronger than you ever gave me credit for, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you wrong. The police arrived 10 minutes later. My stepmother was taken away in handcuffs, her face pale and drawn, her eyes full of a fury I'd never seen before. Vivian watched from the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. When the police led her mother past her, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, frozen, like she'd been carved from stone. And then Charles was next to me, his hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded, but I wasn't. I felt hollow, empty, like everything I'd ever believed had been stripped away. She killed my mother, I said. She stole everything from her, and she made me think it was my fault. Charles pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. It wasn't your fault, he said. It was never your fault, and now she's going to pay for what she did. I stayed in his arms for a long time, listening to the sound of his heart beating, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Safe. But when I pulled back and looked at him, I saw something else in his eyes. Something I couldn't name. Charles, I said, is there something else you're not telling me? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then slowly he nodded. There is, he said, but I'm not sure you're ready to hear it. Tell me. He took a breath, his hands tightening on my shoulders. Anna, I didn't just move next door to protect you. Did I move next door because I couldn't stop thinking about you? I couldn't stop dreaming about you, and I couldn't let you go without telling you the truth. What truth? He reached into his pocket and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, a small velvet box, worn and faded. He opened it, and inside was a ring. My mother's engagement ring, the one she'd worn before she'd married my father. Where did you get that? I asked. Your mother gave it to me, he said. Before she died, she told me to give it to you when you were ready. She knew what was going to happen to her. She knew your stepmother was poisoning her. And she wanted you to have this. I stared at the ring, my mind reeling. My mother had known. She'd known she was dying, and she'd given her ring to a man I hadn't even met yet. She trusted you? I said. Even then. She trusted me. He met my eyes. And I'm asking you to trust me now that I know I failed you in a different lifetime, that I know I was cold and distant and cruel. But I'm different now. I remember everything. And I want to make it right. I looked at the ring, then at him, and I made a choice. Okay, I said. I'll trust you, but you have to tell me everything. No more secrets. He nodded, his eyes soft and warm. No more secrets, he said. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room, staring at my mother's ring, thinking about everything that had happened. The poison, the confession, the ring. And I realized that I'd spent my whole life running from the truth, running from the past, running from the people who'd hurt me. But now, for the first time in my life, I didn't want to run anymore. I wanted to stay. And I wanted to build a future with the one person who'd always been there, even when I didn't know it. The morning after my stepmother's arrest, I woke to find Charles in my kitchen, making coffee. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He moved with the same quiet precision he'd always had, the same economy of motion, the same controlled grace. But there was something different about him now, something softer, more present. You're making coffee, I said. He turned, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I thought you might need it. Thank you. He handed me a mug, and our fingers brushed. The touch was brief, but I felt it all the way down to my toes. I have to go to the station today, I said. They need my statement about my mother's poisoning. I'll take you. He said it like it was obvious, like there was no other option. Charles, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. He stepped closer, his eyes meeting mine. But I want to. I want to be there for you, if you'll let me. I looked at him, this man who'd spent 5 years of my previous life making me feel like I was nothing. And I saw someone else, someone who'd been waiting, patient and determined, for a second chance. Okay, I said. Okay. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and bureaucratic paperwork. I gave my statement, answered questions, signed documents. Charles stayed beside me the whole time, his presence steady and reassuring. When we finally left, the sun was setting, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and rose. Can I take you somewhere? Charles asked. Somewhere quiet? I nodded, too exhausted to argue. He drove us to the edge of the city, to a park I'd never been to before. We walked along a path lined with old oak trees, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral ceiling. I used to come here with your mother, he said. When I was young, she'd bring me sandwiches, and we'd sit on that bench over there, and she'd tell me stories about you. About how you'd laugh when you were happy, and how you'd sing to yourself when you thought no one was listening. I stopped walking. You knew my mother? Of course I did. He turned to face me. She was my godmother. She and my mother were best friends. She asked me to look after you after she was gone, and I promised her I would. I stared at him, my mind reeling. My mother had known Charles. She'd asked him to protect me, and he'd spent years keeping